This is a loosely coupled show with James Hickey and Derek Martin. If you're new to this channel, we chat about software architecture and design. Make sure to subscribe to get all our latest episodes. If you have a suggestion for a topic or a guest, make sure to let us know in the comments.
So anyways, one of the companies that I've been talking with, they have this, multiple systems that they outsourced parts of, they basically outsourced these different systems to, I don't know if it was the same company, but they outsourced it to like third-party developers who built these systems for them. And now obviously it's costing them money to maintain. So they're one of the issues is they're looking to build their own internal IT team with developers and all that. And then kind of the next step is what they're looking at doing is redoing all those systems and taking like an SOA kind of approach to that, like a DDD SOA, something like that. So yeah, I've been in talks with their head of IT, or I don't even know what his title is, but so when I first spoke with them, his thoughts were he wanted to go with a Node-based stack, primarily because it's the pool of applicants in that, our experience with Node.js is way larger than, let's say, .NET. I think that's fair to say. Now, so that, and I was like, yeah, I can do, like, for me personally, I don't care if I'm doing .NET or whatever, as long as it's structured in some way. So if, so my suggestion was, if you're going to do Node, then maybe use it something like Nest.js. And Nest is basically a web framework that's similar. It's kind of like Angular. It's based off Angular, like a lot of the conventions. So it's kind of like Angular, but for web APIs, kind of. So it uses TypeScript. It's a lot of this, like dependency injection, things like that. It is for someone coming from .NET. Definitely, you get a lot of like dependency injection and types, stuff like that. So anyways, move forward. We talked again. I don't know, whatever, a few weeks later or whatever. So I was going to come on as a contractor, as kind of a solutions architect, someone to just kind of guide them and help them out with a lot of the architecture and things like that. But they're still hiring developers to stay, like, be on the team. So what he's found in the weeks, it was a few weeks or a month or something, and his experience is actually really interesting. So before you already know what happened. I was going to ask you what you think that happened, but I already told you. But in my mind, the question is, like, why are there so many Node-based developers compared to .NET? And there are a lot of answers I think you could give to that. I think one of the big ones is a lot of, right, like every year we get a ton of new developers in the industry. And the amount of new developers who are building stuff in Node.js versus, let's say, .NET are probably like way higher, like the majority for sure, right? I mean, probably just because Node.js is kind of easier to get started with. And I think that's just kind of, it just kind of compounds, right? It's like there's more articles about Node.js, there's more content. People are like, yeah, it's just so much easier to get up and running. And yeah, I agree, it is, for sure. And we've already talked about this in a previous episode as far as why would you go with .NET versus Node, and there's issues around like security and package management and a BCL, all those kinds of things. So it's interesting what he was finding, that he was interviewing all kinds of developers, not just developers who had like only Node experience. What he found was the developers who did have Node experience he considered to still be like a low intermediate developers when he actually questioned them on like their knowledge of building systems, like distributed systems, that kind of stuff, right? Like the nitty gritty. If you're going to build an SOA system, like you need to know when should you do RPC, when should you do messaging, how would you cache, how would you split this up. I don't know the questions he asked, but those probably were the kinds of questions. So yeah, what he found were the majority of the Node developers he was talking to were basically coders. They could code stuff, but they couldn't think about how to build systems well. And his experience was the really strong candidates that he found were all .NET developers. They had the strong like knowledge of how to build like a system and deal with messaging and deal with how do you manage having distributed components. And so I mean that's like a real world thing that happened that I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. So actually he's basically planning on moving to .NET now because he's able to get people who have the skills he needs, but they're all skilled in .NET, and so he didn't want to do .NET originally, but now he's like, well, those are the people who have the skills that I need, and .NET is a good choice for that kind of system, I think. But his original intent was all like it was totally 100% being driven by where are the people in the market, like where are they all flocking to. So to me, it seems like maybe, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think there's a different skills. There's definitely like a certain kind of skill set that someone in Node will have versus someone in .NET or someone in Rails or whatever, right? But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because he was even saying like not even distributed systems, like just general programming, engineering principles. He found that Node.js developers who did have a lot of experience on paper were just lacking in their ability to go beyond like a basic application, right?
I don't know why that would be. I couldn't even I could speculate, I guess. I have no clue. But when we talk about like, I mean, up until you said that like distributed systems part, I find it kind of odd because I would have guessed not the opposite, but I've always felt that the .NET space, yes, we have a few different messaging platforms to use, like frameworks to use, libraries to use, like and Service Bus or Mass Transit or Rebus. There's even like a few other ones that I kind of just looked at recently. One's called CAP. Not really as popular though. But when you hear about the industry as a whole and you get out of .NET and you think about just messaging in general, I don't know whether if like I'm talking specifically about messaging, I don't know that the .NET space is really that big into messaging. I mean, there's a few tools and stuff to do it, but at the same time, and the reason I say that is because on the .NET Conf last week, Clemens Vassars is, I don't know his exact title. I know he works in Azure, probably the head of program manager of some sort because he was talking about messaging in his talk. I don't know if you caught it or not.
Oh, I was muted. No, I didn't.
But I'm paraphrasing here, but at the very beginning of his talk, he said something along like, I'm doing this talk because apparently nobody uses messaging or something like that. And I don't know if he meant that like seriously or whatever the case may be, but I kind of thought, oh yeah, it's probably true. Like I think there's some select group of people, but I would say the vast majority do not. So yeah. I don't. And then when you think of things like the so-called popularity, again, I wouldn't say it in .NET, of something like Kafka, I don't hear about it. Anybody using it in the .NET world. So when you again, that's not a queue, that's like a log, but still people are using it for integration between systems. Yet I don't even know if I've heard of anybody in my little Twitter bubble that's using it.
Yeah, when I hear of Kafka, it's usually you're not using it right. It's like,
But regardless of how but like I don't hear much about and like that's kind of my bubble is, I think for the most part, people that are doing similar type of things that I am, that I'm into. And yeah, I don't hear about people using it. So like when you get like the pool, what people know, don't know. I mean, there's probably some relevance to the systems that you build and what type of systems are generally built with what type of things. Like if you're creating line of business stuff, then yeah, that's pretty much .NET as a whole. You could probably describe it that way. I don't know.
Yeah, it might be like geography based too, and I mean, I'm not going to take this one example and extrapolate this is the way the whole industry is. But it is interesting, like whether that is like based on geography or the industry that they're in or whatever, right? So that definitely plays a part.
Yeah, for sure. Geography is probably the big one.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that there aren't no developers who can do distributed systems.
I mean, they probably clearly are.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't live in the world, so I don't really know, but yeah, I would guess there's probably a number of things. I think a large part of it is probably that you were alluding to at the very beginning, which is just the number of newer developers and what technologies that they're using. And I think .NET has a big problem in that space. I
agree.
Since COVID, I can't say this for anything now, but I mean, it probably is still relevant as it was 6 months ago, is that any conference-ish user group that I went to outside my area was always people generally in their 30s, or like my age, late 30s, like almost everybody that's going to a .NET user group. I mean, there are some younger people, but it's generally because then, they joined a company that's what they use.
And that's actually what I told this head of engineering person. One of my thoughts was, I wonder if it's because a lot of the applicants you have are younger, because Node is kind of hip and trendy with younger people, whereas if you're finding the stronger developers that you're getting are kind of have been using .NET, maybe that's because just a lot of older developers have been using .NET, like Node. That's just the experience they've had. Because I mean, that's kind of one of my thoughts was like, if you split by demographics, then definitely like the newer, well, I don't know, 30 years old or less, probably I would expect to have more people using things like Rails and Node. 30 years old higher, 35 years old higher, something like that. Probably Java, .NET.
Yeah.
Some of those some of the languages that have been around for a while. So that might just be that's just kind of the way the demographics work out. But it is a problem, because how many newer developers are getting into .NET, unless they're like, if they're forced to, because they just happen to work for a company that's doing .NET.
Yeah,
which is kind of how I got into .NET.
Same.
It just kind of fell into it, right? So, that's probably worthy of another episode altogether.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Loosely Coupled Show. If you did, please subscribe for more on software architecture and design.